All right, so the book that I read was Same Kind of Different as Me. And before I start, I'm going to do a little bit of a historical background. Um, though slavery was abolished before the story takes place, many plantation owners in the South wanted to preserve the slavery system. They didn't think that it should have been abolished. So they created, different practices of slavery, but under different names, and sharecropping, which is what our main character Denver did, was one of them. Starting with Denver, our main character, he grew up experiencing slavery. He spent many years of his life as a sharecropper, like I said. His youth was extremely traumatizing. He experienced his grandmother's death and was exposed to many violent incidents of racism. And after spending decades working as a sharecropper and this racism, he decides to get on a train and he never looks back. After leaving this life as a sharecropper, Denver spent his time on the streets and he was homeless. He didn't know how to read or write, which contributed to the fact that he could not get a job. He moved constantly around the country, going from Dallas to Fort Worth, Los Angeles, just to name a few. And as a member of this homeless community, Denver experienced and witnessed a lot of violence on the streets. He decides to turn this violence and turn this anger, and he decides to turn to God and then become a member of the Union Gospel Mission, which at the time was a Christian-based type homeless shelter. And this is where he meets our other main characters, Ron and Deborah Hall. After Ron Hall, who's the second narrator of this book, and it bounces between both his and Denver's perspectives. Ron grew up in a lower middle class family and spent his youth, working on his grandfather's farm. And in college, Ron met Deborah, our other main character, who he later married. And Ron eventually becomes a high-end art dealer, which makes him extremely successful, which really differed from his life growing up. And since this, really differed from his life before, and with his newfound success, he became enamored with his money and his wealth. And Deborah just didn't like that lifestyle. She was very united with God, and her kids were united with God. They were very spiritual. With this, they began to grow apart. And with this job, Ron had to travel. He was traveling a lot. He ends up having an affair. And with this affair, once Deborah discovers it, she's obviously very upset. And she blames herself. But suggests that in order to rekindle their marriage, they need to attend marriage counseling. As a part of this counseling, they were suggested to spend more time together, do things that they would enjoy. And since Deborah was so united with God, she found an article about the Union Gospel Mission and wanted to volunteer. And Ron decided to go with her. In some ways, they were reunited spiritually. With their visit to the United Gospel Mission, Ron was not very fond of it. He had this attitude. He was very successful, but he, in some way, just didn't feel like he needed to socialize with people who weren't of his success. There was an incident while they were volunteering with Denver, and Deborah suggests that, Ron go talk to Denver, go befriend him, and then their friendship kind of blossoms from there. Their friendship as a whole was very in between. At the beginning, Denver was obviously very, very reluctant to become friends with Ron. They both led completely different lifestyles. Ron was a successful, wealthy, white businessman, and Denver was homeless. And Denver, as their friendship continued, felt like Ron's friendship to him was very catch and release, which catch and release is a term used with fishing, where you catch the fish, do whatever you need to do with it, take your pictures with it, and then you release it. And Denver felt like that's how Ron was with him. He only used him to talk, hang out with him when it was convenient. And then once he was finished, he would get rid of Denver. Deborah unfortunately passed away from cancer, which was obviously very hard on her family and Denver as well. Deborah played a really important role in Denver's life, and she did touch many lives at that. After Deborah's passing, Denver, he was super worried that Ron wouldn't visit him anymore and he wouldn't be his friend. And this was also played into the Catch and Release. But their friendship definitely grew from that. Some of the central themes that I found, faith obviously does play a very central role in this book, and it impacts both, Deborah and Ron and Denver's lives. When they were faced with tragedy, like their love for God and their faith became like a source of hope, and help them grow and help them strive. An example of this would have to be The Affair for me. So Deborah was so united with her, with God and her spirituality, that when they were doing that marriage counseling, they suggested do things together, and that led them to going to the United Gospel Mission, which led to their friendship with Denver. Another theme, to me, this is just a me thing, is like reconciliation, like friendship. Both Ron and Denver came from completely separate lives. Ron, he did grow up, lower class, but he was successful when after he became an art dealer. And then Denver, he came from slavery, sharecropping, the racism, and he ended up being homeless, which they led completely different lives. And then through their friendship development, as they grew more, they realized that they're more similar than they think.